Man, what a journey this has been. The past 8 weeks we have been looking at chord progressions, the nitty gritty, getting down into the very, very basics of how do we create the chords out of the scales? How do we move those chords around, whether they're major keys or minor keys? What special things can we do to tweak the chords in order to make them very interesting so we can make a song that is familiar yet challenging and surprising all at the same time? It's been a lot of fun, and thank you for joining me once again for Dulcimerica, everybody. My name is Futch, and this final episode of our 9-week series is going to wrap all of the things we've learned so far into a nice, tasty burrito, something that you can use in your everyday work, whether it be writing songs, transcribing songs, or just messing around. So we've talked about all of the ingredients and all of the procedures and all of the rules for doing this chord progression gig, right? But this time around, we're going to look at a very, very important part of that and dig into another area of music theory called voice leading. Voice leading basically is taking a look at not just the chords and how they move from chord to chord, but looking at all the voices within the chord. Remember, if we're working with triads, we're working with 3 notes in a chord. And each one of those notes is going to end up in a different location when we move those chords around. In order for these chord progressions to sound smooth and wonderful, it's a good idea to be thinking about voice leading. That means not making really long distances between these voices getting from point A to point B, but trying to make as small moves as possible in order for every chord to sound as strong and as full and as effective and powerful as you would like them to be. So in order to study that, we're going to dig down into an area of chord theory known as inversions. And whether you know it or not, as a mountain dulcimer player, you actually utilize inversions quite a bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Starting off with a very, very basic chord. Now, with the mountain dulcimer, it's a little bit different, but if you look at a piano, and people tend to play the piano in a lateral fashion. That is, the notes are all right next to each other. And so if you were to lay down your root of the chord, and then go up 2 notes and lay down your 3rd, and then go up 2 more notes and lay down your 5th, you could hop, skip, and jump, and there you've got a chord. And that would be known as a root position chord. The root's on the bottom, the 3rd's in the middle, the 5th is on the top. And if you look at it on a music staff, they kind of make a traffic signal or a snowman. They're all real close. They're all stacked on top of each other, basically. And that's a nice tight voicing, and it's very, very standard. However, if you're moving these root position chords around and you keep them in that formation, you are making a lot of big leaps between the individual voices inside of each of those chords. And to make things a bit smoother, we start moving into different inversions of these chords and moving the locations of the individual notes or pitches in the chord. So let's go ahead and take the first inversion, for example. The first inversion chord is going to take the 3rd and drop it down an octave and make it the lowest pitched note in the chord. So what we end up having in the case of, say, a D major, D is on the bottom, F sharp's in the middle, A is at the very, very top, the highest pitched note. That's a root position chord. But if we take the F sharp and drop it down an octave, F sharp is now on the bottom, D, the root of the chord, is in the middle, and A, the 5th, is at the very, very top. And the one thing you'll notice here is that instead of having a nice tight pattern of chords all touching each other, we now have 2 big gaps in between the 3rd on the bottom and the root in the middle, and then root in the middle and 5th on the top. There's spaces there. It's not as tight. I like to think about this in terms of a sweater. A nice tightly knit sweater will keep you warm during the winter time, and a root position chord is a tight sweater. A first inversion chord is a loose sweater. It's got lots of big, wide, gaping holes in it. It looks super cool, but you don't feel anything but super cold when you're wearing it. That is a first inversion chord. We've got a little bit of air in the chord, a little bit of space. And because the notes are further apart, they don't form as tightly wound a texture. And sometimes those chords can be a little indistinct, especially with the root of the chord buried in the middle of the other two notes. Then we have what's called a second inversion chord. This instead of taking the third and putting it on the bottom, we take the fifth of the chord, normally the highest pitched note, and we bring it down and make it the lowest pitched note. We bring it down a whole octave. This actually works out pretty good because what we end up having are the root and third are still close together, nice and tight. And now we've got a nice rich low bass note. It's the fifth, but nonetheless it's a lower tone. And the three of those interact together to make a really, really nice strong chord. And that is the second inversion chord. Those are the only ones we're really going to be working with in terms of first, second inversions. There are third inversion chords that involve our seventh chords, dominant seventh chords, major seventh chords, minor seventh chords. And we won't get into that. We're going to keep it nice and simple for moving triads around. Now there's one more thing I want to mention here, and that is called an open chord. So you've seen that what we're doing with the root position, first inversion and second inversion chords is we are just dropping one of those notes down an octave. The open chord basically has this same sort of theory, but you've got notes that are outside the range of an octave. So you got a really, really big spread happening between the highest pitched note and the lowest pitched note. And that's called an open chord. It's called open because you get more of an open sound. It's a little less distinct, so if you don't want to put too fine a point on it, you can use an open chord as opposed to using the first inversion, second inversion, or the root position chords. So let's go ahead and demonstrate how these look, how they sound on the mountain dulcimer. And we're going to start off with an extended slant chord. This is favoring the bass, and this is in root position. So first of all, look at these chords again, and look how they're all basically nice and cozy and tight together. So I'll play a 7-5-4 D major. It's a nice solid sounding chord right there. And then you can take a look at the rest of the chords. We've got 8-6-5 for E minor. We've got 9-7-6.5 for F sharp minor. And we'll take it down here to 3-1-0 for G major. That's probably one of the more popular of these chords that we play. A, 4-2-1. B minor, 5-3-2. And C sharp diminished, 6.5, 4, and 3. As you can tell, those are all nice, rich chords. They sound really, really good because they're all a very, very close interval to each other, and they register very much as those chords, roots on the bottom, third in the middle, and fifth on the top. Now let's take a look at a first inversion chord. We're going to take that third of the chord and drop it down an octave and make it the lowest pitched note. These chords are going to be a little bit indistinct in some cases, and they're also known as slash chords. Now I'll show you what I mean here in a second. Let's go ahead and play the D. Notice it's a D slash F sharp, 2-0-0. In this case, the bass note, the lowest pitched note that we're playing is F sharp. That's the 2 on the second fret. This is a D major chord. Normally we would have D as the root note, but we're playing this F sharp, and we've got our F sharp, the third, on the bass. We could play an E minor G, which is an E minor with a G as the bass. F sharp minor with an A bass, 4-2-2. So see, we're just taking the L shape and we flipped it over from here to this. Here's our G major with a B bass. There's our B right there. And we can keep doing this up the scale, just inverting that L shape. There's our A with a C sharp bass. There's our B minor with a D bass. And then we're going to change the shape for our C sharp diminished with an E bass and do this. Not the easiest chord shape in the world, but there's the result right there. So whenever you see a slash chord, basically that's telling you that you're playing with an inversion. And it's letting you know what note is going to go on the bottom. Because normally you'd play the root of the chord. If you're going to see an E major chord, you're going to play E as the root. But if you see an E major chord and you see a B next to it with a slash, that means play E major but play B as the lowest note. That's going to be a second inversion E major chord. They're also called slash chords. Can you get away with not playing that note as the root? Absolutely. As long as you play the chord, the music should sound really good. But most composers have a reason for wanting to invert the chord. They want that chord to sound a certain way, or they're trying to facilitate melody, or a walking, descending, or ascending bass line. Lots of good reasons for wanting to bring inversions into the mixture. And one of these is to get a nice smooth flow from one chord to another. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second inversion. These are going to be slant chords, also favoring the bass. So here's a 4-3-2 for D major, and we're putting the A, the fifth, on the bottom as the root of the chord. We have our E minor with B as the root. We have F sharp minor with C sharp as the root. We have G with D as the root. We have A with E as the root. B minor with F sharp as the root. And C sharp diminished with G as the root. Now, when I mentioned that these are favoring the bass or favoring the melody, typically these are great inversions to use if you are doing descending bass lines. You can switch these back and forth and walk those bass lines down while maintaining the integrity of the chord. The ones favoring the melody is if you're really working with melody and you want to maintain the integrity of the chord while moving the melody around. All right, let's take a look at some other examples here. For example, let's take a look at the open chord L shape. This is the standard way that we do the L shape pretty much with the mountain dulcimer. We've got a 0-0-2 for our D, 1-1-3 for E minor. These are really good sounding chords. F sharp minor, 2-2-4, G major, 3-3-5, A major, 4-4-6.5, B minor, 5-5-7, and then a different shape for our C sharp diminished, 6.5, 6-8. Now those are considered open chords. If you take a look at those notes on the standard music notation, you can see that they're spread pretty far apart. There's a gap in between each of those notes. They still sound really good, and the reason for that is that we are indeed playing the lowest pitched note, the root, in each of those chords. And the L shape is very helpful in giving you a nice solid sound, but also it's very, very wide open because of the distance, the intervals between the notes inside the chord. Another example of open chords is these first inversion chords. These are all slants, 2-3-4 for D major, E minor, 3-4-5. Now listen to that E minor right there. It's sort of indistinct. It doesn't scream E minor. Because not only is it a first inversion chord with the third on the bottom, but also it's an open chord where we have gone outside of the octave. So we've got a lot of airiness inside of this chord. Compare it to the L shape, E minor, 1-1-3. Boom. That one just screams E minor. This one? You kind of have to listen to it. But if we invert that and make it a second inversion chord, that's a lot better. That sounds a lot more strongly, affirmatively E minor. So you can see that the first inversion open chords typically are slants, where the string or the finger that's on the string closest to the bridge is on the melody. Those are going to be fairly indistinct. And unfortunately, this is predominantly the way most dulcimer players play these chords, these slant chords, is first inversion, which means we lose a lot of the texture and the flavor that we would normally have if we played root position chords or even second inversion chords. What else do we have here? We've got F sharp minor for our first inversion open chord. We've got G major, we've got A major, we've got B minor, and we have our C sharp diminished. And then finally, we've got just a plain old second inversion open voicing. These are extended slants, and they do still sound really, really good. We've got D major, but the bass here is A, the fifth on that. But we really got a nice high pitch on that melody, that D. So it sounded pretty good, and that's why we are favoring the melody when we are playing these extended slant chords. Even though it's a second inversion, they resonate really well because usually the melody is carrying the actual root of the chord. We have E minor, we have F sharp minor, going down here to G, then to A, then to B minor, and then finally C sharp diminished. Now isn't that incredible? Even though we're playing these same three notes, just by rearranging them in different, with the root position chords, or putting the third on the bottom, or putting the fifth on the bottom, it makes a really, really huge difference on how that chord sounds. And that's really why it's important to know all of the different chord shapes for each of the chords that we're able to play, because that does give you a lot more in the way of options when you start moving these chords around. And that's what we're going to look at right now. Is now that we know how to change the organization of pitches within the chord to get these different sounds and tonalities, how do we use that to our advantage when we want to get a nice smooth transition from one chord to another? So let's do this using an example from a piece of music that's off of my most recent album, The Beauty and the Terror, called Too Strong for This. And the main crux of the chord progression is A minor, E minor, G major, and then D major. Okay, that's fairly straightforward there. Those are all L-shaped chords, and they are all favoring the melody. These are all open chords. So what we're looking at is the root is on the bass string, but everything else we're laterally moving back and forth across the fretboard. So the fifth of the chord is on the middle string, and the third of the chord is on the melody string. With our 002, we don't have to fret the strings, the bass and middle strings there, but imagine that that's an L shape, and that's what we got here. So I'm using all L shapes. So let's kind of track what's going on. First of all, we have our A minor, and that's an open chord. It's pretty wide spacing. And why do we have so many open chords on the mountain dulcimer? Because we already have a full octave in between the bass string and the melody string. And that's just going straight across from here to here. So if we extend at all in either direction, we are now going outside the limits of a full octave, and that's why the mountain dulcimer has so many of these wide spreads in terms of open chords. So we have our A minor, open, E minor, that's going to be an open chord. We have an open G and an open D. Now let's take a look at each individual note, each individual voice inside of the chord. Each one of those guys is traveling to another point in time. Let's start here. This note, A, is going to come all the way down to E. 1, 2, 3, 4, it's moving 4 notes away. And since I'm using the same shape and moving the same distance, mostly, you can say that for all of these. So you can see they're all making these pretty big jumps every single time I move into a different chord. Boom, they all rush down here to one side. Boom, they all run up this way. Boom, they all run this way. It's like they're all confused and they're just not sure which side of the fretboard they want to be on. It sounds good, but it also isn't smooth. The idea about voice leading is by trying to pick one or two elements of a chord and then finding those same one or two elements inside the next chord that you're going to, which means you're going to hold on to one of those notes and not change it. And we looked at that a little bit earlier on in our study. If we can hold on to a couple of notes and just move a couple of other notes maybe, and not have to jump so far from one side of the fretboard to the other, then we get a smoothness that happens. So let's do something different. Let's take this A minor chord and let's invert it. So I'm playing a 6-4-4 now instead of a 4-6-6. So it's still an L shape, but now it's got a whole different sound to it. This is a first inversion because it's A, C, E, and the C, which is the third, is on the bottom as the lowest pitched note. So we could write this A minor / C. So we've got A, C, and E. What are we going to do from here? We're going to move to E minor. Well, what does A minor and E minor have in common? Well, E, that note right there. So what I want to do is, that's the note I'm going to lead with, kinda, basically. I'm not going to move that E, I'm going to leave it right where it is. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to move the C down 1/2 step to B, to be a part of this E minor chord. E minor is E, G, and B. So I'm not going to jump 3 or 4 notes all the way down here. I'm just going to go down 1/2 step. We're not going to move this one at all, which leaves the A. The A is just simply going to go down a whole step to G. Not a very small move. It's definitely not a move of 3 or 4 notes. So we've taken this big jump of A minor, where all the notes jump simultaneously 4 notes and 3 notes away from where they were. And instead, I'm going to invert this first chord and then keep this note where it is and slide these 2 down to our E minor. Now we have a second inversion. That's an E minor / B, because B is the lowest pitched note. That's the third. Sorry, that's the fifth. And that's the lowest pitched note. Now, what does that have in common with a G major? A lot, actually, because we've got G already for G major. We've got B already. So we already have the root and we already have the third. What we're missing is the fifth, which is D. That's going to be 1 step down from our E if we move it down to the 3rd fret on the middle string. There's our G major. It's an inverted G major. It's a first inversion, so we write that G / B. As B is the third and it is the lowest pitched note. So we've gone from our A minor into our E minor. Not a lot of movement going on there. And now we only moved 1 note between E minor and G major. Perfect example of voice leading right there. All right, now we're going from G major to D major. What notes do we already have in common? D on the middle string. That is the 5th of G major. It's also going to be the root of D major. So now we just have to change the other 2 notes. We're going to move the B down a step to A to get our 5th for D major. We're going to move the G down a 1/2 step to F sharp and have that for the 3rd of D major. Look how easy it is to move between those two chords, and we're not going very far at all. Nice smooth transition, and that G to D sounds a lot more together than this G to D. Those definitely sound like two different zip codes, don't they? And compare that to this. Ain't that smooth as butter? That works out really good. So that would be a D/A that we're playing, with A as the lowest pitched note of the chord. We've taken the fifth and putting it down on the bottom. So let's do our original progression here again. Lots of lateral up and down, back and forth movement. And now let's do that with our voice leading practices, our first and second inversions. Wow, makes a huge difference, doesn't it? It's this sort of smoothness that guitarists, piano players, mandolin players all strive to achieve. It's not just enough to pick a chord at root position and then move it to another chord at root position. There's some forethought that goes into blending these different types of inversions as we move our chord progressions around. And the idea, as I mentioned once before, is small moves. Try not to run from one side of the fretboard to the other, but rather try and contain your movements using inversions so that you're only moving like a whole step or a half step at a time, and usually try and find notes that have similar notes in the next chord. This is going to make for some really tasty and smooth progressions. And believe it or not, folks, that really wraps up our study of chord progressions, from how to build them to how to move them to how to interpret and expand them, and finally how to really make them sweet by thinking about how far these notes are traveling. I have had a blast doing this and researching it for you and putting it all together. And if you want more of this, yes, there's a whole lot more. I've got tons and tons of material that I didn't cover in all this, but we'll be offering special workshops this fall and winter to my patrons on Patreon. So if you haven't heard about Patreon, you can check it out by going to patreon.com/BingFutch. Scroll down just a bit, click on the open house featured tag section, and there's over 6 years of free material there, and it gives you an idea of what I'm doing basically on Patreon. All my CDs, books, videos, and educational materials are all on Patreon, and you can join for $5 a month or $50.40 a year for the annual pass. If you join at a higher tier level, you get all kinds of rewards like t-shirts, stickers, me coming to your house and playing a concert in your backyard, all kinds of fun stuff. So if you're interested, go over and take a look at that stuff, and then please do consider becoming a patron and then joining me for these workshops this fall and winter as we dig down deeper into the world of chord progressions. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great, great rest of the week, and I'll see you next week with some more looks at what happened at Winfield, Kansas at the Walnut Valley Festival. Take care, everyone. Play a little bit every day. We'll see you soon.